Hello, Tracy. It's really nice to see you. Tracy Zou from the University of Hong Kong. And you're an academic developer, Tracy, but you're doing really interesting work, I think, on internationalization of the curriculum, which you call internationalization of teaching and learning. And I was lucky enough to see a presentation by you about this last year in Hong Kong, and you've also published several articles on it. So it's really lovely to talk to you today. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I feel extremely honored to appear in your video series. I watched all of them, and I'm very happy now I will be one of these.
Well, that's really kind. Thank you. But alongside your work in the University of Hong Kong, you've created this community of practice across 4 universities, and these are the publications that I've been reading, and it's what you were talking about in your presentation last year. So they're the two things I'm really interested to talk about today. First of all, can we just talk about internationalization of the curriculum in Hong Kong? What does that actually mean in your context, Tracy?
I think in Hong Kong, there is something unique here because in many other countries, as far as I'm aware, they tend to use internationalization as a way to attract foreign students. So in some sense, it increases profit if you have more international students. That's one rationale of internationalization. But that doesn't apply in Hong Kong because Hong Kong government has decided for any institution in Hong Kong cannot have more than 20% international students. So no matter how hard we work on internationalization, it will not be a motive, or it's not our rationale to attract more students. So the economic aspect of internationalization applying in many other places probably is not that applicable in Hong Kong. So here, I think our aim is to make our curriculum relevant to all students. Though we only have 20% of international students on our campus, they come from over 100 countries.
Right.
So in terms of diversity, it's a very productive and diverse environment.
That sounds really interesting. So you call it internationalization of teaching and learning rather than the curriculum. And I know you've also worked on assessment, so presumably that's also part of it. But is this something that you feel, do the academics who are involved in this process, do they share the same view as you? Is it a kind of a natural thing for them to understand what internationalization of teaching and learning means, or do you have to work quite hard to get them to understand what you're trying to do?
So there has been 3 years I've been so-called cultivating a community of practice on internationalization of teaching and learning. So it's not that easy at the beginning, and I would say I have worked quite hard to get resonance and with faculty members on this term. And I think what I did was something called making connections. I watched your video with Professor Betty Lisk, and she asked a very important question in my view is the question on why faculty members are not engaged in internationalization is probably the wrong question, because they are engaged, but they are not engaged in the sense that we might expect or we might frame in that way. So what I did was to try to create this connection. So I try very hard to understand what they are doing, how they make sense of the concept, how they currently incorporate the concept in their courses, in their curriculum, and how that can be positioned in the literature we are familiar with as internationalization, as Betty's book. So I'm trying to put things into perspective, and I think that's the hardest part, but that's the most meaningful part of this community of practice. I spent, I think, more than 1 year just eliciting the existing practice from faculty members and connecting it to our work.
Interesting. So you started from where they are, or where they
Yes,
were, shall we say, and
yes.
then you drew them into the wider literature in that way. Yeah, that's a really interesting approach. So in terms of the I should say before we go any further that you've got a specific role for internationalization within the academic development section in University of Hong Kong. So this is why you've been taking this forward. But in terms of then deciding to involve 3 other universities, I'm interested to know about that process. I mean, now, were they at the same position as you, with where you've talked about starting from the faculty position and moving out? I mean, did you all share the same views at the beginning?
Yes, we share the same views. So on this project, the core team consists of all academic developers in the respective centers in these universities. But we have 8 universities in Hong Kong. So why we engage the 3 universities and then 1 in mainland China? I think that quite depended on personal network.
Okay.
So when we started the project, it was a teacher and learning scheme funded by the university. So we need to draft a proposal and bid for the funding. You tend to work with people that you are already familiar with. Of course, colleagues in other universities can be very cooperative and helpful, but at the beginning, I didn't know them well. So I start with people I knew, and so we built this project. But once we got the funding, we have to work with these 4 universities. So there's a boundary. Yeah.
Yeah. So you had a kind of core team so people in each university who were leading the community of practice within their institution, and then you all met together as a team and then worked out from there. Is that right?
Similarly, but just I wish to point out, when we firstly met, there was no community of practice. So people were aspiring to cultivate one. So that's why we came together. I felt the community of practice didn't exist before we start to create it. Maybe it's a bit too ambitious to claim this, but I somehow feel it's the start of the project that bring out the collegiality and the synergy in the community.
That's fantastic. So do you mean within your own university as well, or across the 4? So had you already done this work with the academics within your own institution before you got this funding?
Before I got this funding, there was 1 year groundwork. And the groundwork, interesting, you mentioned assessment work I did before. We had a community of practice on assessment. And the model worked quite well because we adopt the same approach. That's from eliciting what faculty members was currently doing at that moment, and try to make connection to the framework we want to promote. And I felt that model was very productive. So I sort of replicated it for the internationalization, but I encountered some interesting difficulties because when I worked on assessment, faculty members naturally felt, yes, I'm doing assessment. I feel assessment is very important. If you can help me enhance my assessment design, I definitely welcome you to join my team or come to talk to me. But when I promoted internationalization at the beginning, that natural resonance didn't exist. So quite often people first ask me, what do you mean by internationalization? But they never asked me, what do you mean by assessment? So there was a difference between the assessment community and internationalization community. What I was quite proud of was the initial connection making we did that make people feeling that they connect to the community. It's they have relevance to what the community is doing. So it's interesting work, and I think I will remember that forever.
Yes. Yeah, well, and obviously you're spreading the word in terms of things that you've learned as a result of it, and how other people can gain rapidly gain experience in the same way that you've done. I just wanted to turn to something a bit different, because you told me that your PhD was in a completely different field. It was in organizational development, in manufacturing, but I'm sure that kind of leadership and an organizational role must have had an impact on, or given you some experience to help you in develop the community of practice.
That's a very interesting question. So when I firstly entered the higher education field, I thought, oh, all my PhD in organizational studies would not be useful at all, because there were different settings. But then I realized it was hugely relevant and useful, because I was focusing on team productivity. And one key part of it is to create a collegial environment and facilitating knowledge sharing, supportive atmosphere. And that is very useful in the current community of practice work I'm doing, because collegiality plays a big role.
Yeah, I'm sure it did. And yeah, I'm sure that will carry on playing a big role for you as well. But the other thing you also mentioned was that previously you were involved in working on intercultural interaction as well, between local and non-local students, as you say. And that must have fed also into the whole internationalization of teaching and learning agenda.
Yes, so I did that work partially because it's a key agenda in universities in Hong Kong, as we hope to create synergy between local and non-local students. And it was not that easy. And another thing I got from the experience is that intercultural interaction can really play a key role in push forward the internationalization agenda. In some of your other videos, I found, I remember you and other scholars question the name of internationalization, because it could be linked to some other rationale that's not our key aim. But interculturalism and multiple perspective seems to be a more appropriate, correct me if I'm wrong, but they seem to be more appropriate terms to our core mission. So I also felt that, and my intercultural interaction project illustrated to me, if we can really create productive intercultural relationship, we've achieved a large part of internationalization.
Absolutely. I've written about this, and I've called it interculturalization rather than internationalization. But it's as our communities become more and more diverse, I think it's in a way it's more appropriate. But still, there are many parts of the world where, you know, the diversity that you have in Hong Kong is not as apparent. So I suppose it's more of an issue in other places. Well, it's been so lovely talking to you today, Tracy. Your enthusiasm's amazing, and I can imagine that your community of practice is going to go from strength to strength, and I look forward to seeing what happens next and to keeping in touch with you. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks very much for talking to me today.
Thank you. And I would like to say I got a lot of inspiration from you and from colleagues in this field. So I'm very grateful.
Oh, thank you so much. And thanks again for today. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.